Yo, what's going on everybody? It's Freaky299 and welcome back to another Destiny 2 TheFinalShape build video. This time I have a Solar Warlock that is sure to keep all of your allies alive and just carry you through the hardest content in Destiny 2. I've been using this to just farm out Grandmaster Nightfalls with ease, as well as go into things like Expert Arena Executable and stuff like Dual Destiny and just Hard Overthrow. Any piece of content, this build goes into it and carries your team to victory through keeping you alive, keeping your team alive, having the fastest and craziest ability regeneration I've ever seen, and just having a really consistent playstyle. It's really just a fantastic build. It's fun, and man, does it just work so well this season in this episode. So of course, with all my builds, there's going to be a picture at the end along with a dim link in the description for easy copying. Without further ado, let's jump into the build. Starting out with the subclass, we are actually using Solar and not Prismatic. I have tested this build and tried to use it with Prismatic, but Solar is just really where the full power and strength of this build comes through. Of course, we have Song of Flame, which is just an amazing new super. It gives us Radiant, it launches tons of projectiles, does tons of damage, always scorching and igniting things. It's really just an absolute beast of a super that you can use in any situation to take down enemies with. And then, of course, it gets even better when you actually use it with the Solar subclass, because as much as the Snap melee is really good on the Prismatic subclass, using it with Celestial Fire means that instead of 3 explosive solar energy blasts, you actually send out like 5 of them, and these things go way further than your Snap, allowing you to use it in stuff like Grandmaster Nightfalls from a range without having to get super close where you can potentially just get taken out. Now, moving forward, we are also using a Phoenix Dive. Phoenix Dive is one of the best class abilities I find. It immediately throws you to the ground, it gives you Cure, as well as it's on a super low cooldown at 55 seconds base, as opposed to Healing Rift or Empowering Rift, which are at a minute 22. We're looking to get our class ability back super quickly because we're using the Helion aspect, which obviously procs when we use our class ability. So, moving forward, we mentioned before we are using Celestial Fire. It's a fantastic melee that actually has tons of range to it, as well as homing capabilities, meaning that you can launch it out from a distance in GMs or hard content. It can actually hit the things you want it to and proc the things you are looking for, as well as it does some really good scorch damage. And then for our grenade, we are using Healing Grenade. Healing Grenade, as soon as it lands, it cures allies on impact, as well as it grants restoration to all our allies. Now, this is the thing, we are also using the exotic helmet Speaker's Sight. Speaker's Sight turns our Healing Grenade into a restoration turret that we will cover more when we actually get to the exotic, but pretty much whenever we throw down our Healing Grenade, it's going to stay there and continue to spit out additional healing grenades that will float towards our allies and provide restoration to them. It's a beautiful source of healing that can just keep your allies alive in the hardest of content. Now, moving forward, we have our first aspect, Touch of Flame. Touch of Flame is really nice because it makes it so our Healing Grenade has improved strength with the Cure, making it a ×2 Cure as well as ×2 Restoration. This also makes it so our Restoration turret gets those buffs, so this means that when you are on the Solar subclass and using Speaker's Sight in this build, it's actually better to be on Solar because with Touch of Flame, you actually get that ×2 Cure and ×2 Restoration, which can really keep you alive in Grandmaster Nightfalls. So, Touch of Flame, it's amazing with Healing Grenade, and even more amazing with Speaker's Sight. And then for our second aspect, we are using Helion. Helion is amazing. We activate our class ability to summon a little solar mortar that fires globs of lava at our enemies to scorch them. Now, this is so good because we actually are in a loop of always having Helion up, which means it is constantly scorching things and constantly proccing ignitions and dealing massive amounts of damage, or just consistent amount of damage. The ignitions are just a huge bump depending on when they go off, but just having a consistent amount of solar damage just always going off with Helion means that we can not use our weapons as much and rely on this aspect to deal some good damage for us. And not only does Hellion just have it's just a really good aspect in general, but it gets even better when we are using something like Ember of Singeing, which makes it so whenever we are scorching enemies, our class ability regens way faster. This means that if we have Hellion out, it's scorching enemies, we get Ember of Singeing proccing the entire time, which means Phoenix Dive comes back by the time we need to reproc Hellion. In most cases, I found it comes back and we still have like 10 seconds on Hellion, but we can just use another Phoenix Dive and keep going in this loop. So not only that is that all amazing, but also we are using stuff like Ember of Ashes, so we actually apply more Scorch stacks. This makes it so we can actually cause ignitions with Hellion and with our melee, and with Song of Flame just way more efficiently. It just more damage for us. As well as we are using Ember of Searing, so when we're defeating all the Scorched targets from Hellion, we are actually getting melee energy back, and we are spawning Fire Sprites. Fire Sprites are the key thing here because picking up Fire Sprites grants us grenade energy, which of course granting us grenade energy means we can throw out more healing grenades. So Ember of Searing, it just fits in beautifully here because we can use our melee to get it back quickly and just get our grenade back even quicker through Fire Sprites and using our melee with stuff like Impact Induction. Now, as much as all those fragments are fantastic, the real king of the build here is Ember of Benevolence. Applying Restoration, Cure, or Radiant to allies grants increased grenade, melee, or class ability regeneration for a short duration. Normally, this fragment is something that you would barely ever use because it's so situational and there's never really a time where you're consistently getting this procced. But with this build, it is always procced. You are always in a fire team in endgame content like Grandmaster Nightfalls or the expert arena executable. Stuff like that, you are always in a fire team, which means when you throw down your healing grenade, you are applying restoration. And before Ember of Benevolence can even go out, you're applying restoration again because it's a restoration turret. Add to that your Phoenix Dives, which apply cure, and boom, suddenly Ember of Benevolence goes from a fragment that you never really use and is never really up, to with this build, it is literally permanently up. And the ability regeneration you get from just this one fragment is insane because there's literally times where I can throw out 2 healing turrets, I can launch out melee so quickly, and I can just Phoenix Dive over and over and over again. Because I throw down 1 restoration turret, it heals my allies a couple of times, and before I know it, boom, I got another grenade. This means that in activities as well, where you're constantly going from zone to zone, fight to fight, you can actually lock down, get your Hellion going, get your healing turret going, and have it up for the next battle, for the next encounter, for the next whatever you are doing. Ember of Benevolence is literally insane with this build, and Solar is really where it just shines through because this isn't available on Prismatic. So Speaker's Sight, it's just, this is the best way you can build Speaker's Sight. This is the best way you can build this build. Because as much as Prismatic is the hot button, beautiful, wonderful subclass that it is, Solar is really where the true power of Speaker's Sight is going to come into effect. Because the amount of healing you get, wow. And then the ability regeneration you get from doing that healing from Ember of Benevolence, even more wow. So that is going to do it for the subclass. Let's move on and talk about those weapons. Now, to start off the weapon discussion, I've been primarily using the exotic pulse rifle Red Death Reformed. This is a solar pulse rifle that just got back into the game, and while it does not have the most amazing power, I will say, its slotting into this build is just too perfect to pass up. It's a solar weapon, so it feeds into that, as well as it causes final blows with this weapon to cure us and increase our reload speed. Very, very nice to have. Not only that, but it also has the inverse relationship, so when we deal damage with this weapon, we increase handling and take reduced flinch, as well as we have movement speed increase for a short time, but when we are at reduced health, we have additional damage to this weapon. So, very nice additional things to have when we're in hard content. We're getting down to low health and healing back up. So if we are actually low health, having that increased damage means we are more likely to take out an enemy and apply cure to ourselves. There's been many situations where I've been able to take out a goblin or take out a small dreg, and that applies cure, which saves me in that moment. So Red Death Reformed, it's absolutely amazing, and with the catalyst that is going to be coming out with Act 2, which isn't that long away, it's going to get even more better. And while there are a couple other better pulse rifles you could say, I think Red Death Reformed just has a really nice, solid, consistent usability to it. The cure it applies to you and just the increased reload speed and damage that you have, as well as having it so when you reload after final blows you cure your nearby allies, means that it slots in with Ember Benevolence, it slots in with your Speaker's Sight. This weapon just slots in perfectly with this build. So I definitely recommend giving it a try. I know you might not be as surprised or as excited about the damage it deals, but just use it for a couple runs and actually see how you feel about it, because I'll tell you what, you give it enough time and this gun does grow on you. So going from there, of course, if we are dealing with Grandmaster Nightfall content, we have anti-barrier covered with Red Death Reformed. Moving on from that, we want to take care of Overload champions, and while I don't really use Overload swords with this build, especially in Grandmaster Nightfalls, you want to use something with chill clip, specifically something like Deliverance or Riptide. They are both fantastic stasis fusion rifles that you can slot in. They have chill clip, allowing us to stun Overload champions and freeze unstoppable champions if need be. I found this is the best weapon that you can kind of slot in and actually use this in higher end content without having to resort to double primaries or something like that. And then we don't really need to worry about unstoppables, because our Hellion, with 3 globs, it hits an unstoppable and that causes an ignition. And then because it's scorching it means we get our Phoenix Dive back, and we constantly have Hellion proccing ignitions on unstoppables. So we don't have any trouble with them at all. It's only overloads that we really need to deal with. Of course, if you're going into other pieces of content, lower end content, stuff like that, you can swap out Red Death for something like Tommy's Matchbook or Sunshot. No Hesitation is also beautiful with this build. You have things like Lumina, which just add in more to that support style build. Again, the weapons I'm recommending you use are the ones I found to best use in Grandmaster Nightfalls. Once you swap out of Grandmaster Nightfalls and start going into other pieces of content, that's really where you can start using different weapons. This set of weapons is just something you can use to deal with all champions and any piece of content that you step into. And then for heavy weapons, you just want to use something like a solar rocket launcher. Of course, if you have something like Apex Predator, that's going to be fantastic. If you want, you could also switch it up to something like Cold Comfort, which is also a really good stasis rocket launcher that can also synergize well with something like your Deliverance or Riptide. Now, that's going to do it for the weapons. Moving on to the artifact mod. Starting out with the artifact mod, in the first column we have 3 anti-champion weapons. Specifically, we want to make sure we have anti-barrier pulse rifles so we get actual anti-barrier rounds on our Red Death Reformed. This also makes it so pulse rifles are overcharged while the modifier is active. Overcharged is a 25% damage buff when you are an expert or higher content. Moving on to second column, we have overcharged armory, so weapons with Dealer's Choice, Radiolaria Transposer, Collective Purpose, and Sundering Origin traits are always overcharged when the modifier is active. Very nice to have, as there are many cases in lower end content that we are using these brand new weapons. And then we are also taking Winning Hand, which makes it so weapons with the Dealer's Choice Origin trait make it so combatant precision final blows or rapidly defeating combatants cause the targets to explode and deal solar damage to nearby targets, as well as having several equipped weapons with the Dealer's Choice Origin trait increase the effect of the explosion. If you're looking to just benefit from the smally, use No Hesitation and see how you like it, because it's really fun once it starts to kick in. Moving on to third column, we're taking Elemental Siphon, so rapid final blows with a kinetic weapon or a weapon matching our equipped super create an elemental pickup that matches your equipped super. Now this is very nice to have because we are using Red Death Reformed, which means it's actually spawning fire sprites for us. There are certain cases where we don't exactly scorch an enemy that we're taking down, so having this means we spawn that fire sprite and then we also spawn fire sprites through our Hellion scorching stuff and them actually going down and spawning the fire sprite on their takedown. Moving down, I actually do have Overload Sword here because once you actually step down from Grandmaster Nightfalls, there are cases where I want to swap out my fusion, swap around my weapons a little bit, and actually bring out a sword, in some cases even Ergo Sum. This is really nice to have because, again, overload champions and lower end content aren't as much of an issue. Once you actually get into higher end content like Grandmasters, that's really where you want to have a chill clip fusion on you that you consistently get those overload procs off and not have to be close to them to get blown up instantly. And then speaking of chill clip weapons, that also comes in with creeping chill because stasis weapon final blows against slowed or frozen targets release a burst that slows. This is just really nice to have because of course chill clip immediately slows, and then if they're frozen or slowed, boom, more slowing. Very easy to stun overload champions this season, as well as just spread that stasis chill around everywhere. And then for fourth column, we're taking counter energy, so whenever we stun a champion, we just gain some energy to our least charged ability, which is usually our grenade or melee, but again, Ember Benevolence means that they come back so quickly that counter energy is just a bonus on top of everything we have. And then also Radiant Orb, so whenever we have a Solar Subclass equipped and we pick up an Orb of Power, we get Radiant. We are spawning tons of Orbs of Power, so we're pretty much always Radiant and getting that increased damage buff. Finally, in fifth column, we have Prismatic Transfer, so when we cast our super, each member of our fire team with a super different than ours gains a bonus to weapon damage. Really nice to have, as usually people are rocking different elements than Solar, especially if they're playing Hunter or they're playing Titan. And then we're also using Shield Crush, so while we have Radiant applied to us, our grenade recharges faster and deals increased damage. Again, it doesn't deal the increased damage, but the increased recharge speed is really nice to have. And then if there's at any point that our allies give us Void Overshield or Wolfen Mail, then we get the melee recharge faster and deal increased damage. So that is going to do it for the artifact mods. Moving on to the armor. Starting out with the helmet, we have our exotic Speaker's Sight, which comes with the exotic perk, the Lost Voice. This makes it so healing grenades spawn a restoration turret that causes it to spit out little healing orbs that float to our allies and heal them up with ×2 cure and ×2 restoration because of our Touch of Flame aspect. This also makes it so the helmet causes healing allies to occasionally spawn orbs of power on them. So whenever we're in content and we heal our allies up, they spit out a little orb which they get and we can pick up ourselves. This means that the orb of powers that we can spawn in any given activity is suddenly so much more increased because this doesn't only apply to the grenade, this applies to any healing caused, whether that be through no hesitation or a phoenix dive or our grenade itself. Any healing sources cause it to actually spawn an orb of power on a 10-second cooldown. This means that tons of orbs are spawning everywhere. We can pick up those orbs, get our armor charges for us, as well as I found this exotic works wonderfully with the Kvostov auto rifle because it relies on picking up orbs of power to get its ricochet bullets up. If you use this exotic with Kvostov, you might find that this build actually works really well with it because Kvostov is just constantly getting its ricochet bullets through picking up orbs of power through healing all your allies. Speaker's Sight is just an amazing exotic, and wow, does it just do wonders on Solar Subclass. Now, moving on to the actual mods, we are taking a Harmonic Siphon, so Rapid Solar Weapon Final Blows create Orbs of Power. We are using Red Death Reformed here, so this is why we're using that. But if you are using something like Kvostov, you can switch it over to Kinetic Siphon. Next, we are using Font of Wisdom, so while we have an armor charge, our intellect is boosted by 30. This is really nice to have because being able to actually use our Song of Flame is really nice, as it does so much damage and basically allows you a free clear of any encounter you're in. And then finally, we're using Heavy Ammo Finder because we are primarily using Red Death Reformed. All of those takedowns with this primary weapon and it being an exotic weapon means that we have increased chance of actually getting heavy ammo drops. And then moving on to our stat focusing quickly, of course firstly we want to focus resilience to 100 so we have that 30% damage reduction. This 30% damage reduction is near vital in endgame content, and if you don't have it in something like Grandmaster Nightfall, you are asking to be one-shot. Moving next to that, our second focus stat is going to be discipline, so we actually throw out our healing grenades as much as possible. Having that grenade ability cooldown as low as possible means that we actually apply more healing, we are consistently applying healing, and we're consistently getting our Ember of Benevolence up, which means we get into this loop of constantly having our abilities up and restoring fast because we are healing allies. And then finally, we want to get our recovery up as high as possible. If you can't get it to 70, that's no worries, but you want to get it to 70 and no higher. 70 is pretty much the cap you want to go. If you go to 80, you're going to have wasted stats. Having this higher means we can use our Phoenix Dive quicker, as well as it means our health is regained at a faster speed, which is just really nice to have, especially in endgame content. There are certain cases where you might just be out of all of your abilities because you might have gotten taken down and revived and you just don't have anything. So having your recovery a bit higher means we can get that Phoenix Dive back quicker, we can get that Hellion on, we can start scorching enemies, and then we can get all our abilities coming back because we're scorching, we're meleeing, and then we're getting our grenade back and we're getting this healing and restoration, and everything just goes back into a loop. Down to the gauntlets, we are rocking impact induction, so whenever we deal damage with our powered melee attack, we reduce our grenade cooldown. This is also why it's nice to have celestial fire, because having that increased range means we don't have to get close to actually get a snap off. And then we also have focusing strike, so we get some class ability energy back when we also deal damage with our melee. Very, very nice to have, as we're constantly scorching enemies, which means we're constantly sending out celestial fire, which means it's constantly feeding into our ability loop. And then just to top it off, we're using Font of Vigor, so we have a plus 30 in strength while we have an armor charge. Our melee isn't that powerful enough to actually warrant putting on heavy-handed, and our grenade actually doesn't do any damage or anything, so it's not worth putting on that, as well as we don't need to put on a grenade kickstart because we have Ember of Benevolence granting us so much energy. So our last kind of choice to go here is just Font of Vigor. For the chest piece, we're going to be matching whatever the current threat modifier is with the double elemental resist. This means that if there is currently a solar threat on the activity you are playing, you're going to want to grab a double solar resistance and then have a third elemental resistance to round yourself out on the damage types that are being dealt. Make sure you're just matching whatever that threat resistance is so you're not getting one shot by that damage type, and then just spread yourself out with an arc or with whatever else you find you have trouble with. If you find you have trouble with ogres and shriekers and minotaurs, then put on a void, and if you find you have troubles with just getting sniped by wire rifles or fallen enemies, then put on an arc, stuff like that. Down to the boots, we are taking double solar weapon surge, so while we have an armor charge, we have a increase to our solar weapon damage. Very nice to have on Red Death Reformed, as having that extra damage increase goes a long way on a weapon like that, as well as this makes it so whatever solar weapon we're using in our heavy weapon slot has just more damage to just nuke whatever enemies we need it to do. And then of course we are taking a recuperation, so whenever we pick up an orb of power, we're getting some health from it. Just a nice little bonus for whenever we're in the middle of content and just need all the healing we can get. Down to the class item, we're taking a bomber, so whenever we use our Phoenix Dive, we're getting some grenade energy back. We're also using a Font of Restoration, so we have a plus 30 in recovery whenever we have an armor charge. Really nice to have, and this also means that if we have our recovery any higher than 70, like at 80 or 90, then it's not worth having this Font of Restoration, as you'll have wasted stats. If you do have your recovery that high, then I would suggest swapping this out for another bomber. And then finally we are taking a Reaper, so whenever we use our Phoenix Dive, our next weapon Final Blow will be spawning an Orb of Power. The more Orbs of Power we're spawning is just the better, because it means the more supers, and it just slots in perfectly because the amount of Phoenix Dives that we actually get off means that Reaper is spawning tons of orbs for us. And that is going to do it for the build. Now, this is a fantastic build that I have just been using to absolutely farm out Grandmaster Nightfalls. I cannot tell you how many times I've saved my entire team just through having a healing turret and Phoenix diving. I literally watched their health bar go down to slivers and just stay up and completely heal back up and re-heal as they are bombarded by blasts of enemy fire. Really, Speaker Sight is just a wonderful exotic, and as much as I wanted to use this build with Prismatic and have Transcendence going, man, does Ember of Benevolence just blow anything that Prismatic has to offer, because having that increased ability regen means that we get our melee, our Phoenix Dive, and our grenade back so quickly that we never don't have them. There's never a point where we don't have a grenade to throw down to heal our allies. There's never a point where Hellion isn't active because we don't have a Phoenix Dive to do. There's never any of that point, so the only issue that we would ever run into is not having enough ammo for a special weapon. But again, we don't have that issue because we're primarily using Red Death, we're constantly getting cures from that, and then with the catalyst for Red Death, we're just going to be even getting more scorching and restoration. It's going to be wonderful to see what Red Death can really do with this catalyst unlocked soon. And then if you want to just have some fun in the Pale Heart or something, I really suggest you try out this build with Kvostov, because Kvostov relies so much on Orbs of Power, and the fact that you can get orbs spawned on your allies, meaning that you don't have to run out and pick them up, is just wonderful. Add to that a kinetic siphon and suddenly 2 kinetic weapon surges, you can totally switch this build into just a pure Kvostov slaying machine. So I would highly recommend you do that. But if you're stepping into something like Grandmaster Nightfalls or the Expert Arena Breach executable activity or any of the new stuff that is coming in Act 2, then use Red Death, use your Solar, and just watch this build carry you through with ease. I've never felt more relaxed with the build than with this Warlock, with this Solar Warlock build. So, if you need a picture of the build, there's going to be one on screen for easy copying, as well as a dim link in the description. If you liked the video, be sure to just hit that like button, leave a comment if you want to suggest any weapons or things I should try out with this build. I love seeing what you guys have to share and what you think of to try with it, to see what can just break this build even more than it already is. It's just awesome seeing what you guys come up with in the comments there. And if you want to see future build videos, be sure to hit that subscribe button to see what else I'm making, because man, all these builds I've been cooking up are just absolutely mint, and I know you agree, because once you actually try it out, once you actually step into Grandmaster Nightfalls and you actually see this thing in action, you know it means business, you know it works, and you know it's worth trying and having fun with. So thank you everybody so much. I've been FreakyDude99, and I'll see y'all in the next video. Peace out.